Greetings everyone, and welcome back to Luca Sprues. In this two-part series, we're going to be having a little look at the inside of the Revell Boeing B-17G Flying Fortress in 1/72nd scale. Now this is a pretty big and a very fantastic model kit. I built this, the F model, the Memphis Belle version, when I was a kid. I believe it was the second bomber that I did, and it was a lot of fun, but probably a little bit beyond my skill level. But anyways, today we'll be having a little look at the box art and the instructions, and in the second part to this video, we'll be having a look at the actual plastic parts. Basically, I've brought this model to help with a restoration project at the Queensland Air Museum, which I'll hopefully be talking about in some upcoming videos. But basically, I'm looking at either using this aircraft to replace another one, or possibly just to borrow some spare parts and then just build this one for my own collection. So without further ado, let's get into it. So we'll start off by having a little look at the cover. So obviously you saw that earlier on in the video. You got some absolutely striking box art there with a beautiful silver B-17 flying through the sky. You can see there's another B-17 here on fire going down, and another one smoking in the background. And you can see some German 109 streaking across in the background, and you can see a few more contrails. So it's definitely capturing the image of the B-17 being used on those famous bombing missions over Europe. And you can see this aircraft in particular has DF, so I believe that is the same squadron as the Memphis Belle. However, this being a G model, it would have been a bit later on in the war. But you can see part of the aircraft is in that flat aluminium finish, so they would have left the factory like that and not bothered painting them later on because first of all, they had air superiority, so camouflaging the aircraft on their air bases was not a priority. And it also saved a lot of time, so you could get more aircraft out in the field. But you can see you've got some green and even some camouflage patchwork on the back here. Not sure if that would have been part of the aircraft's camouflage scheme, and for whatever reason they've chosen to paint this section, but more likely it's an aircraft that was damaged and they've used parts from older B-17s to keep it in the air, and you can see that there. So that's pretty cool, a very striking and beautiful camouflage scheme for this aircraft. I think it's very good. They're very famous for being in that beautiful silver finish. Moving on the side of the box here, we've got some pictures of an actual prototype of the model kit. So as you can see, you've got some very amazing details on the interior there, and the outside is also really good, and it looks really stunning in that color scheme. Then over here we've got some of the details, I believe, for the paints that you need, and it's probably using the Revell codes, which is a bit of a pain because in Australia we can't really get the Revell. Well, we can get enamels as far as I'm aware, but the aqua colors I don't think anyone is actually able to get from any wholesalers or anything like that, but you can always find alternatives. And I believe this is your history on the B-17, or at least a brief rundown of it, talking about that. On the sides there, just the box art repeated. Over here, this is where you got the history, so that would have been something else. So that's kind of your blurb on the B-17 there. And then you've got a few little warnings, and you've got your Made in Europe sticker. And then on the back here, you've just got ads for more Revell products, or Revell products, I should say. So that's all very well and good. Let's have a little look at what's actually inside the box. So we'll open this thing up, and as you can see, it is quite a full box despite its size. And you've got a large number of sprues here, and they all appear to be molded in a sort of shiny aluminium look, which is nice. A good little base to go off of. And here we've got the actual instructions, so we'll take a look at those first. On the front, just a nice little picture of one of the models completed, and then just your little blurb there, talking a little bit about the history. The G model features a chin turret, and basically that's the main difference. Although, as you'll see, they also had a later modification for the tail gunner's position that was a little bit bigger, called the Cheyenne turret. So we'll have a little look at that as we go. Then you've got some technical data here, so that's all some very interesting information, good to have there. And we'll open it up, and you've just got your basic guide for starting out. So if you're a beginner, it's good to have a read through this, but if you're a bit more experienced, this will all kind of be pretty obvious. You've got your key here, so it's good that they've got a nice clear layout for what everything means and all the processes involved. Yeah, so that's all good. Moving on, we've got the paint guide on one sheet. So with Revell, they like to have a code letter applied to each particular color, And unfortunately, a lot of their paint colours, they suggest mixing, which is a real pain. Especially if you're not airbrushing, that can be a real pain to actually get the right mixture, and that takes a lot of time. However, like I said, since it's hard to get Revell stuff in Australia in terms of their paints, you can easily find some alternatives by having a little bit of a look online and doing some research to find the colours for the aircraft. So yeah, relatively useful if you've got the colours you need and are happy to mix some paints, but otherwise you might have to start looking elsewhere to get an idea on what to paint things. So over here we've got a nice little sprue map, so obviously we'll have a look later at the actual individual sprues themselves, but it's relatively simple to go through all of that. And assembly begins with the interior, so basically the interior in this kit is what takes up 80% of your time. It is absolutely huge, and there's a lot of detail and a lot of fiddly parts, which is probably no surprise. So the interior is made up in modules, so this module here would be your bomb bay. Bulkheads for the bomb bay also act as the actual wing spars, which is really clever. They've designed that all quite nicely. I built the Revell B-17 a while ago. When I was a kid, it was actually my first bomber that I did. It was probably a little bit too much for my skill level back then. But overall, the fit I can remember being very good. And the instructions obviously show that it's quite well thought out how to fit everything together, so it's quite precisely built. So it's nice that you've got also some bombs that you can put in the bomb bay, so it's not just empty. And you've got a fair bit of detail there to assemble, a lot of bomb racks for all the bombs to be stowed on. So moving on, once you've assembled all of that and put that kind of roof section on, you can slide that into the fuselage halves. You've also got a little bit of painting to do for them, because there's a little bit of sidewall detail. Then you've got the flight deck as a separate module, so just putting your seats together and putting them in, the controls, and you've got an instrument panel there. I believe you've got a decal, however, from memory it's raised detail, so you could also just paint it if you want. So then you've got the bulkhead for the front leading to the nose compartment, and then you just slot that in with the bomb bay behind it. Moving on, you've got your Bendix turret gets slot in here, and if you don't glue that to the floor there, you should be able to rotate it, which is nice. And you've got the navigator and the bombardier's seats, and they just go in there. I've got a little bit of detail with the table there for the navigator, nothing too extravagant. Then you've got your famous Norden bomb sight, so no B-17 would be complete without one of those famous things. So it should have some nice detail there to paint up, and then you can put that in the nose there, so your nice hard work on your bomb sight should be good and visible. Then moving on to the radio room, so you've got a few radios that you then glue to the back wall behind the bomb bay, and you've got a floor space there. So there's a fair bit of detail for the radio compartment, which is quite nice, and you've got a fairly large number of seats there, and then you've got another rear wall with even more radios and electrical equipment. And this is interesting, you've got the option in this kit to build either the Sperry bull turrets, which are quite famous on the B-17, or you can fit it with the radar, which was originally the H2S radar, but I think it was called the H2X in the B-17. Basically, you've just got a basic ground mapping radar that you put in that area instead of the bull turret, and that allows the crew to figure out where the aircraft is roughly over land using landmarks. So that if you have to bomb and there's a heavy amount of cloud over the target, you don't have to go around like in the Memphis Belle movie. The waist gunner's position, so on the G model, I don't know if it was on the F models, but I definitely know on the G models they had that kind of windscreen there put in, so the cold air wasn't blasting you in the face. I'm sure that would have been a welcome modification. I neglected to mention it at the time, but the waist gunner positions in this model kit are both lined up, rather than the later staggered version, suggesting that this is the early production version of the B-17G. Then you've just got a little piece here that the tail wheel would have slotted in. Then you've got your bull turret, and this thing is fiddly as hell to put together. It's two clear parts, and you've got a huge amount of detail on the inside, so that is going to be a real pain to put together. I don't know if you can see it, but I've got someone very interested in my video. Possibly. And then you've basically got the mechanism here that the bull turret would be slotted into. So if you do this all right, your bull turret will actually be able to rotate 180 degrees horizontal traverse, and it will also be able to move vertically, which is pretty nice. So that's all those parts there, and you've got your ammunition being fed up there. So that is all pretty cool. Moving on here, you've got the guns for the upper turret. I'm not sure who made these ones, but it's basically for your engineer there. So you've got some very nice looking detail there. And here you've got the first option. So this is the original tail turret that would have been on the early G models and on the F model. And you'll notice the difference when we turn over the page. But yeah, so you've got a fair bit of detail there. You've got all your guns and your seat even. So some very nice details there. You can really see how cramped it would have been with the model. And here is the other version. So this is obviously the slightly larger tail turret, and you can tell it's a bit wider. And yes, pretty much the identical assembly, just a little bit wider. And then you've got the optional windows for the radio compartment, or you can have it open, or even a version where the windscreen has a separate hole for the 50 cal in the back there to stick through, or this version here where it's just out in the open. So that's nice. You've got a few different options with this kit. You'll definitely end up with some good spare parts, which I'll talk a bit later about, but that's one of the reasons I actually got this one off the shelf. Here you've got two different options for the front windshield. I don't know too much about the difference between these two, other than one version is longer and the other one has a smaller kind of separate window frame there. A few different options here for the front glazing section. You've got a posable rudder there, which is a nice little feature. Then you're just chucking on the side panels there with the 50 cals for the navigator and bombardier. Then you move on to working on the wings. So you've got posable flaps on this model, which is quite nice. You don't usually get that. Then you've got the internal details for the landing gear base. So you've got things like your exhaust pipes there. I think you've also got like a... let me check my handy B-17 diagram I've got here. So you've got pressure ducts, and you've also got your supercharger. This is the air intake here for the superchargers, just down here, and your turbochargers are obviously down there on the bottom there, and you've got a nice little oil tank that slots in there, so that's all quite nice. Internal detail for the radiators for the oil cooling system, so that's all quite nice, and then you chuck that wing half on there. Posable ailerons there, so that's a nice little feature, especially for dioramas or just as a separate model. Again, elevators are posable, so that's all quite nice. And then you've got your four 1,200 horsepower radial engines there, and you've got a fair bit of the ducting and also the exhaust system modeled there, so that's all quite nicely done, and that all just slots in. So I think this is definitely a lot more complex than the Academy kit and a lot more detail, probably quite similar to the Airfix one from my memory. And then you got your reduction gear, and then some of these lines might be a little bit thick, but you can always cut them off and replace them with copper wire for the ignition and all of that. And you've also got this little piece that goes in behind the gearbox there for the propellers to be glued onto. And then you've got options here for the cowl flaps to be left open, and I'm sure if you wanted to super detail this kit, you could also leave the engine cowling off and have a maintenance diorama or whatnot. The wheel can roll, so if you don't glue a certain part together, you can have the wheels turn by themselves still, and then you just attach that onto the single strut there. So quite a simple assembly for the landing gear, but the internal bay there is quite complicated. Then you just got your little tail wheel just here, so that's all very well and good. And then, as I mentioned before, you've got the bomb bay compartments have the wing spars molded into them, so it's really quite a strong construction and really easy to line it up, and it fits pretty well. So to slide the wings together to the fuselage, so that's a really solid construction. Big fan of that. Then you've got your bomb bay, of course. If you want all of your beautiful details to be preserved, you can open it up, or you can have it closed if you want. That's another option. Here's your flaps there, so as I said earlier, you can have them extended or retracted. Then you're starting to fit all of these small parts on that I would recommend you leave until after you've actually painted the whole model, rather than put that on before for your machine guns, because otherwise you'll knock them off as you're handling the model. Then we just got a little bit of some sort of fairing that goes behind the turret there. Then you just slap those engines on, a few of the other small details. Again, I'd recommend you leave them off until last. And then that's it for assembly. As for the color schemes included, you've got B-17G 35VE, serial 4297880, DF-F, which is Little Miss Mischief. And I believe That's 323rd Bomb Squadron, so that would have been the Memphis Belle Squadron, I believe, but this would be later on in the war. It's February 1945, so just at the end. By the looks of things here, you've got the old school tail turret there, so, and as I mentioned before, you've got that flat aluminium in the front section, and aft of that kind of section in the middle here, you've got just the usual Air Force kind of olive drab colours there. And then you've got a tail with, I think it's got red on the tail from memory. And again, you've got a mismatching panel here on the left side of the aircraft where the insignia markings are, and the tails are olive drab. So looks like it's a repair job from the field, because you've also got this silver door there. So that's quite an interesting model to do, and I've seen a fair few people have done that, so I'm not sure if I'll be doing this one in the end, but I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then you've got the underside here, so it's grey on the rear and flat aluminium on the front there. And I've got another one here from the 323rd Bomb Squadron, so from Bassingbourn, the same airfield. This one's April 1945, so I believe that is a little bit later in the war. However, this aircraft's been finished in the olive drab colours all over, so it's a little bit more plain and a bit more like the earlier Fortresses. Again, it's got the older turret in the rear section there, but still quite a nice little scheme to do up. And I'll point out now the extra letters here behind B-17G. They tell you about which part of the production block they were and who the manufacturer was. So there were 3 companies making the B-17s, or assembling the whole thing. And that was Boeing, obviously. And then you had Lockheed Vega, so that's what the VE stands for. This one would have been built by them. And then you've got BO, which would have been Boeing, and then I think the other one is DL, so that would have been built by Douglas, who were also building the DC-3s. So yeah, a little bit of trivia there. Otherwise, just some instructions for the, I'm not quite sure, this is a little bit confusing the way they've laid this out, but it looks like the bulkheads for the radio compartment. Anyways, that's it from the instructions. Let's move on to having a look at the actual kit.